Beverly walked near Old Lime Street, but didn't take it. She had grown more cautious. She supposed all of them had, since Eddie's arm had been broken, especially when she was alone. She wove her way through the heavy undergrowth, skirting a patch of poison ivy with its reddish, oily leaves, smelling the dump's smoky rot, hearing the seagulls. On her left, through occasional breaks in the foliage, she could see Old Lime Street. The others are looking at her, waiting. She checks her cigarette pack and finds it empty. Wordlessly, Richie tosses her one of his. She lights up, looks around at them, and says, "Heading toward the dump from the Kansas Street side was a little like 2. Entering some weird asteroid belt. The dumpoid belt. At first there was nothing but the underbrush growing from the spongy ground underfoot, and then you would see your first dumpoid. A rusty can that had once contained Prince spaghetti sauce, maybe, or a Soke soda bottle crawling with bugs attracted by the sweet, sticky remains of cream soda or birch beer. Then there would be a bright wink of sun kicking off a scrap of tinfoil caught in a tree. You might see a bed spring, or trip over it if you weren't watching where you were going, or a bone some dog had carried away, gnawed, dropped. The dump itself wasn't so bad, was in fact sort of interesting, Beverly thought. What was nasty, and sort of creepy, was the way it had of spreading, of creating this dumpoid belt. She was getting closer now. The trees were bigger, mostly firs, and the bushes were thinning out. The gulls cheeped and cried in their shrill, querulous voices, and the air was smudgy with the smell of burning. Now, on Beverly's right, leaning at an angle, there was nothing but the underbrush growing from the spongy ground underfoot, and then you would see your first dumpoid. A rusty can that had once contained Prince spaghetti sauce, maybe, or a Soke soda bottle crawling with bugs attracted by the sweet, sticky remains of cream soda or birch beer. Then there would be a bright wink of sun kicking off a scrap of tinfoil caught in a tree. You might see a bed spring, or trip over it if you weren't watching where you were going, or a bone some dog had carried away, gnawed, dropped. The dump itself wasn't so bad, was in fact sort of interesting, Beverly thought. What was nasty, and sort of creepy, was the way it had of spreading, of creating this dumpoid belt. She was getting closer now. The trees were bigger, mostly firs, and the bushes were thinning out. The gulls cheeped and cried in their shrill, querulous voices, and the air was smudgy with the smell of burning. Now, on Beverly's right, leaning at an angle against the base of a spruce tree, was a rusty Amana refrigerator. Beverly glanced at it, thinking vaguely of the state policeman who had visited her class when she had been in the 3rd grade. He had told them that such things as discarded refrigerators were dangerous. A kid could climb into one while playing hide-and-go-seek, for instance, and smother to death inside. Although why anyone would want to get in a scroungy old... She heard a shout, so close it made her jump, followed by laughter. Beverly grinned. So they were here. They had left the clubhouse because of the smoky smell and had come down here. They were maybe breaking bottles with rocks, maybe just dump picking. She began to walk a little faster, the nasty scrape she had gotten earlier now forgotten in her eagerness to see them. To see him, with his red hair so much like hers, to see if he would smile at her in that oddly endearing one-sided way of his. She knew she was too young to love a boy, too young to have anything but crushes, but she loved Bill just the same. And she walked a little faster, her skate swinging heavily from her shoulder, the sling of his bullseye beating soft time against her left buttock. She almost walked into them before realizing it wasn't her gang at all, but Bowers's. She walked out of the screening bushes, and the dump's steepest side lay about 70 yards ahead, a twinkling avalanche of junk lying along the high angle of the gravel pit. Mandy Fazio's bulldozer was off to the left. Much closer in front of her was a wilderness of junked cars. At the end of each month, these were crushed and hauled off to Portland for scrap, but now there were a dozen or more, some sitting on bare wheel rims, some on their sides, one or two lying on their roofs like dead dogs. They were arranged in 2 rows, and Beverly walked down the rough, trash-littered aisle between them like some punk bride of the future, wondering idly if she could break a windshield with the bullseye. One of the pockets of her blue shorts bulged with the small ball bearings that were her practice ammo. The voices and laughter were coming from beyond the junked-out cars and to the left, at the edge of the dump proper. Beverly rounded the last one, a Studebaker with its entire front end missing. Her hail of greeting died on her lips. The hand she had put up to wave did not exactly fall back to her side. It seemed to wilt. Her first furiously embarrassed thought was, "Oh, dear God, why are they all naked?" This was followed by the scary realization of who they were. She froze there in front of the half-Studebaker with her shadow stapled to the heels of her low-topped sneakers. For that one moment she was totally visible to them. If any of the four had looked up from the circle they were squatting in, he could not have missed her, a girl of slightly more than medium height, a pair of skates over one shoulder, the knee of one long coltish leg still oozing blood, her mouth slack-jawed, her cheeks scarlet. Before darting back behind the Studebaker, she saw that they weren't entirely naked after all. They had their shirts on, and their pants and underpants were simply pulled down to their shoe tops, as if they had to go number 2. In her shock, Beverly's mind had automatically reverted to the euphemism she had been taught as a toddler. Except who ever heard of 4 boys going number 2 at the same time? Once out of sight again, her first thought was to get away fast. Her heart was pumping hard, her muscles heavy with adrenaline. She looked around, seeing what she hadn't bothered to notice walking up here when she thought the voices she heard belonged to her friends. The row of junked cars on her left was really pretty thin. They were by no means packed in door to door as they would be in the week or so before the crusher came to turn them into rough blocks of twinkling metal. She had been exposed to the boys several times walking up to where she was now. If she retreated, she would be exposed again, and this time she might be seen. Also, she felt a certain shameful curiosity. What in the world could they be doing? Carefully, she peeked around the Studebaker. Henry and Victor Criss were more or less facing in her direction. Patrick Hockstetter was on Henry's left. Belch Huggins had his back to her. She observed the fact that Belch had an extremely large, extremely hairy ass, and half-hysterical giggles suddenly bubbled up her throat like the head on a glass of ginger ale. She had to clap both hands over her mouth and withdraw behind the Studebaker again, struggling to hold the giggles in. "You've got to get out of here, Beverly. If they catch you..." She looked back down between the junked cars, still holding her hands over her mouth. The aisle was maybe 10 feet wide, littered with cans, twinkling with little jigsaw pieces of safety glass, scruffy with weeds. If she so much as made a sound, they might hear her, particularly if their absorption in whatever strange thing they were doing flagged. When she thought of how casually she had walked up here, her blood ran cold. Also, what in the world can they be doing? She peeked again, seeing more of the details this time. There was a careless scatter of books and papers nearby, school books. They had just come from their summer classes then, what most of the kids called dummy school or make-up school. And because Henry and Victor were facing her way, she could see their things. They were the first things she had ever seen in her life, other than pictures in a smudgy little book that Brenda Aerosmith had shown her the year before, and in those pictures you really